I'm summarizing the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, adding images, visuals, animations, hopefully making it easier to grasp or to recap. This one is with Robert Sapolsky, Stanford professor, primatologist, neuroscientist, author. And what I really got was an ability to not think of myself as an individual in the present, but to see a bigger game. Peterson mentions an idea that I've heard from him a few times recently, which is that we are not an individual trying to get what we want in the present. We are actually going to hurt ourselves if we just take what we want in the present. Really, the way we should be thinking about it is as if we are a multiple number of people across time. And so if we take care of ourselves in the present, that takes care of us in the future. And moreover, if we take care of others in the present, then we store up goodwill toward ourselves and community that will help us out in the future. It's funny the way that including yourself in the future and including other people changes morality to a mere question of time. So being immoral is doing what's best for you now, but being moral is actually doing what's best for you later. There's a discussion at the beginning validating game theory, and to me the gist of it is that game theory is thinking a level up from the way we normally think. So if on the, say, basic biological level, we say that, and this is the example that Sapolsky gives, a giraffe's heart would have to have a certain shape in order to get blood and oxygen to the brain, and then you go and you discover that that is indeed the way that it is. Game theory is the same in that you look at a group of animals and you say, well, for things to be working this way, these are the rules that would have to be in place, and then you study them and you prove them out, or you examine the game theory concepts and rules in a simulation, and indeed it does play out that way. Another good example of thinking up a level comes from the tragedy of the commons. Let's say for this example that the ocean is the commons. If everybody comes and takes a reasonable amount, then everybody wins because the ocean has time to replenish. However, if one person comes and takes too much, then the commons are depleted, the commons cannot replenish, and then everybody else might get thrown into a frenzy as well, which ends in tragedy. Peterson and Sapolsky briefly mentioned the prisoner's dilemma and the other game theory scenarios they're going to discuss build on top of it. The classic prisoner's dilemma is one in which two criminals are being held and they each have an option. They can keep quiet or they can rat each other out. So let's say in this case it's Jordan and Robert, and they've stolen Sigmund Freud's couch. And now they have a decision to make. The best case scenario is where they both stay quiet and they're each going to get 1 year in jail. However, there is a scenario if Jordan rats Robert out, he gets 0 years in jail and Robert gets 7. But Robert is being offered the same deal, wherein if he rats Jordan out, he gets 0 years in prison and Jordan gets 7. Now, the worst case collective scenario is one in which they both rat each other out because now the evidence is there that they've committed the crime and they both go to jail for a reasonably long time. The dilemma is that if they are being held separately and being told that the other person has ratted the other one out, it's very difficult for them to decide to cooperate. And this example has become classic because it's analogous to so many relationships that we choose to enter, interpersonal, familial, business. There's always this opportunity to cooperate or to stab the other person in the back, and the long-term benefits come from cooperation, but there's always fear and a temptation to stab the other person in the back for short-term gain. So now we need to take the fundamental question of the prisoner's dilemma, which is, do you cooperate at risk to yourself or do you stab in the back? And now we need to extrapolate that across time in repeated interactions because as the podcasters emphasize, you're not interacting with each person once in a social setting or even with multiple animals in the tribe. You're having repeated interactions. And so, what is the best strategy if you're having repeated interactions in order to thrive? And the answer is tit for tat. Tit for tat is that you start off nice. You assume that other people are going to cooperate. If they don't cooperate, you punish them for a turn, and then you give them a chance to cooperate again. This will outperform just trying to be a shark, because that shark will lose their reputation against the other tit for tatters. Let's say blue and green are the cooperating tit for tatters, yellow is the evil taker. As they move around the board, anytime blue and green have an interaction, it's a happy interaction and they both gain from it. Anytime they interact with yellow, yellow does not play nice and yellow gains from it and they lose, but of course they won't repeat that interaction next time with yellow because they are tit for tatters. So you can see that it really depends on the parameters of the game that are set up, but the game theorists have agreed that over time, with games that are complex enough, tit for tat tends to drive the other strategies into extinction. So tit for tat works well in certain conditions. It's not everywhere. Sharks are not swimming around the ocean doing tit for tat. They have enough one-off exchanges that they benefit from. But it's common enough. Sapolsky gives the example of vampire bats, wherein a vampire bat is supposed to regurgitate the blood that it has uh, for the community of offspring, all of the colony's kids, and you can puff up a throat sac with air, and that vampire bat will seem to not be doing their share of regurgitation, and the other vampire bats will refuse to feed that vampire bat's offspring until that vampire bat comes back with a proper sac of blood that it can regurgitate for all of the other offspring. So it's common enough, and they found it in enough species that they think it's highly prevalent and highly effective. I bring up the shark example because this is something Peterson segues into online behavior. You can be a shark, right? You can come up with a new identity. You can spam 1,000 people, see who you can take advantage of. Your reputation doesn't matter because you can just delete your old identity and come up with a new identity or go to another 1,000 people and try to spam them. Peterson asks how cooperation ever gets initiated, and Sapolsky gives two examples. One is, let's say, a land bridge goes away and a community is isolated, they become inbred, it's all family, everybody's helping each other out using tit for tat. Then the land bridge comes back, and that tit for tat community starts outperforming the other community until the other communities either get on board or go extinct. Another example is a tribe in the jungle, and they leave little artifacts, maybe tiny little tools, on the border between them and one of their tribal neighbors. And the tribal neighbors might come back and leave similar, value of trinkets or artifacts there, and then they can establish trade without either of them really risking too much up front until that reputation is built up. They get into a discussion of dopamine that's going to tie back. And so the basics of dopamine are that a rat secretes dopamine when it's lever pressing to get pellets in the lab. And so if a rat knows it's going to get a pellet for every 10 lever presses, a rat will press the levers when it's hungry. But dopamine really spikes when there's intermittent rewards, which is to say the sequence of lever presses that gets the rat the pellet is a lot more random or variable. And Peterson likens this to slot machines, of course. I could liken this to TikTok or other social media where you're sort of scrolling, hoping to find that one thing that's going to give you that big hit. But it's not really the hit that you're addicted to. It's more so the scrolling behavior that you choose to engage in. So hold that thought for a minute because there's a neat story of a kid playing soccer that Peterson gives, and that kid is a brat. They're hogging the ball. They're a pretty good player. They're scoring the goals, but they celebrate too much. They're mean to their teammates, and their mom says, "Look, kid, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game." And the kid says, "What are you talking about? I'm winning." And what the mom is trying to say, per Peterson, is look, kid, you could be playing a few different games right now. You could be building your reputation as a person who is worth cooperating with on into the future. And so there's a larger game that you could be playing underneath this small game that you're playing. The reason the rat's dopamine goes crazy when those rewards are intermittent rather than set is that the intermittent rewards signal to the rat that there might be a bigger game that the rat could figure out, right? If the rat knows 10 lever presses equals a pellet, that's fine, and now it knows how to get pellets when it's hungry. But there isn't that challenge of another game to figure out that could make that rat's life much, much, much better. And so this is the same for the kid playing soccer. They're not just trying to score points, they're trying to play a bigger game and learn how to play a bigger game that could make their life much, much, much better. Because people are going to have the option of whether to play with you again. And that's the important thing, these repeated rounds when it comes to game theory or social behavior or thinking about behavior over time. Peterson ties this to God's covenant with Abraham, saying that if God was a programmer who was programming different bots to play out a game theory model, the covenant that he makes with Abraham would be basically to be a tit for tat player. And so those are the instructions that are going to allow Abraham to suffer up first, but then eventually his descendants will outnumber the stars. They next segue to another little game wherein you have two participants in psychology experiments, and you give one of the participants $100. Now, the first participant has to decide how to split this $100 with the second participant. But the second participant has some power in that the second participant can decide whether the $100 is kept between them or the $100 just goes away. And what we find, of course, you would think that the second participant would be happy, even if they get $5, it's still free money. But it's much more likely that the second participant will punish the first participant if the first participant chooses, anything less than 50-50. And certainly if the first participant really chooses to mess with the second participant and sort of disrespect them. Peterson suggests that playing a game where you actually give a little bit more than what you deserve, so to speak, is probably the best approach over the long run. He talks about dealing with graduate students or dealing with your family to be a little extra encouraging, a little extra rewarding, especially when people are doing behaviors that you like, and that people will be so thrilled to be around you if that's the kind of person that you can make yourself, that the rewards will come back and back and back and back because we are, of course, a community across time. They next get into this kind of deep discussion of the human condition and how there are a lot of different types of dopaminergic rewards for us. We can get it from haikus, we can get it from poetry, we can get it from ice cream, we can get it from building a business. And Sapolsky gives a very hard-hitting quote.
The only way you could use the same dopamine neurons and same dopamine range from 0 to maxing out for like both haikus and like
Mm-hmm.
lottery is the system resets. It's got to keep resetting as to what the scale is, what the gain is on the system. What that means is it constantly resets. It constantly habituates.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is like the most tragic thing about the human predicament. Whatever was a great unexpected reward yesterday is going to feel like what you're entitled to today and is going to feel insufficient tomorrow.
And it seems to fit his view on the world because he spends some of the interview expressing or lamenting how terrible these baboons are to each other. The ones that he studies have a lot of free time, and so they spend a lot of hours every day just making each other's lives miserable. So together, Peterson and Sapolsky talk about the importance of people having something to do and the ways that the dopaminergic reward system can cause us to do things that are pathological or that are not productive for the community across time because we are creatures who need to be doing something and preferably something new, figuring out a new game. Let's close with a Peterson quote that's a little bit more optimistic. Thank you for watching.
The path of maximal adventure is better than the path of infantile satiation. And so you might say, human beings are eternally dissatisfied. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Or you could say, well, there's an abstract form of meta satiation, let's put it that way, that's the same as being on, it's like a bloodhound being on the trail. It's the pleasure of the hunt. It's the pleasure of the adventure. It's the pleasure of that forward seeking. Right. And I like to think about it like Sisyphus, except that what Sisyphus is doing is pushing a sequence of ever larger boulders up a sequence of ever higher mountains. It's not the same. It's this continual movement upward towards some unspecified positive goal. And then the ultimate satiation isn't the top of any of those mountains. It's the sequential journey across that sequence of peaks. And I suspect that's what that dopamine system is actually signaling when it's, because that would make sense with regards to anticipation.
It's the happiness of pursuit.
So this is something new I'm trying out. If some part of it worked for you, please let me know. If a part of it didn't, I'd like to know that as well. I'm going to make more of these, but this is the very first one. And if you comment, I will probably change in the future to do the things that you want me to do. Thank you.